Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on securing sustainable access to aquatic foods. My name is Charlotte Bergström, and I will be moderating this event today. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Aquatic Resources at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, SLU Aqua. And this webinar is part of a joint collaboration between SLU and WorldFish, and it's funded by the Swedish Research Council. So SLU and WorldFish, together we have hands-on practical experience working with aquatic foods in the field and with local fishers, small-scale aquaculture farmers, practitioners and managers in both national Swedish settings as well as international settings, with East Africa and Southeast Asia being in focus. So we're organizing this webinar today together with SLU Global and SLU Aquaculture. And we are gathering experts from various international universities, institutes, stakeholders and organizations to discuss sustainable aquatic food solutions for the future. And this is a contribution to the UN International Year of Artisanal Fisheries. And it's also the African Year of Nutrition 2022. And we also doing this in the time of a lot of events. We've just had Stockholm Plus 50 taking place a couple of weeks ago, and we are looking forward to the UN Oceans Conference later this month. Please be aware that we will be recording this webinar. And if you have any questions, please pose those in the Q&A channel and not in the chat. So the Q&A channel is where you pose your questions. Could change slides, please. So we have an interesting program lined up today. We have 4 interesting talks, both from the artisanal or small-scale fisheries and on aquaculture, and also, of course, on aquatic foods. We will have a short break if time allows, and then we'll finish off this webinar with a half-hour discussion with an international panel with 4 panelists. Yes, so can you please change slides? So first out today is Dr. Shakuntala Haraksingh-Tilsted. She's the 2021 World Food Prize laureate, and she's also a research program leader for value chains and nutrition at WorldFish. She'll be setting the scene today by introducing us to aquatic foods and the importance of aquatic foods with the inspiring title, Aquatic Foods for Nourishing Nations. So welcome, Shakuntala. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Charlotte, and greetings to everyone joining us today. It's really a pleasure to be working with you in this webinar termed Securing Sustainable Access to Aquatic Foods. It's really a timely title, thinking about the global narratives that we have today and all the global platforms that we are having. For example, as Charlotte mentioned, the UN conference on the oceans coming up very soon. Let me get the second slide, please. Thank you. So I'll make a short presentation and talk about the global food and nutrition security, an introduction to aquatic foods, and why we should be thinking about aquatic foods towards transformation of food systems. Then I'll briefly give 4 approaches of nutrition sensitive systems that we are collaborating with partners across Asia, Africa, and the Pacific, and end with 3 recommendations. Next slide, please. So let us look at the global food and nutrition security. I know this is common knowledge to many of you, but it is quite alarming that in the late years that we have seen a slowing down towards the target of the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, in the areas of the world where we have large populations, Asia and Africa, we also have countries that are low and middle income, and we also have large numbers of malnourished and undernourished people. Quite alarming is that if we look at the rates of undernourishment from 2019 to 2020, when the pandemic COVID-19 started, we can see that prevalence there has been a gender disparity in the prevalence, with more women being affected than men. And worryingly, the rates of malnutrition in children continue to rise. And not only do we have underweight and undernourishment, but also the degrees of overweight in all population groups continue. And now with the war in Ukraine, with disruptions in food, fuel, and fertilizer, we also see exacerbating trends with respect to food and nutrition security at a global level. FAO has estimated that 13 million people more will join, just this year, will join the ranks of the undernourished. So let's move to why is it in such a situation we should be thinking about aquatic foods, which are nutritious and which I term superfoods. Next slide, please. What are aquatic foods? Many of us work with just a small portion and a small diversity of aquatic foods. But we must remember that this is a large ocean of foods, diverse foods, thousands of animals, plants, and microorganisms that are farmed or harvested from waters. And we must also remember the Ocean Conference coming up, that it's not just aquatic foods from the oceans, but it's aquatic foods from all water bodies, including inland water bodies. And it's of extreme importance at the global level, with an estimated over 3 billion people having aquatic foods as an integral part of their diets, and over 800 million people depending on aquatic foods as an integral part of their livelihoods and income, and many of these are women. Next slide, please. Why do I call aquatic foods superfoods? Well, this is, and again, we should think about the diversity, recognize the diversity of all aquatic foods. And this is because of the multiple benefits of aquatic foods, not just for food and nutrition, that's the space in which I work, but also the socio-economic benefits. And lastly, we've seen with COP26 and now leading up to COP27 in November of this year, the environmental benefits. So it's a superfood for people and for our planet, and for diverse peoples and diverse geographies and ecological zones of our planet. In the last years, we've seen, well, I would just say in the last 2 years, we've seen a greater prominence of interest with respect to seaweed. Next slide, please. When we talk about using aquatic foods for nourishing people and the planet, we are really talking about changing the narrative from feeding to nourishing, and ensuring that the foods we work on are diverse foods that form part of the diet on the plate, and not just the few staple foods that we have been so focused on. For example, maize in Africa or rice in Asia. We need to also have a people-centered approach by looking at all actors within the food systems. And it will be good if we just not begin with producers and those who work with inputs to producers, but also begin with consumers and work our way back through supply chains and back to consumers and inputs, because that would give us a very different perspective of food systems. Recently, and this is just recently in the last 2 years, the UN Nutrition has put out a discussion paper on aquatic foods and sustainable healthy diets. And Blue Food Assessment, which is led by Stanford and Stockholm Resilience Center, have put out a series of very high-profile papers with respect to blue foods, aquatic foods. Next slide, please. When we look at aquatic foods approaches, this is what we in WorldFish and with our partners are working with. One of the entry points is putting people at the center and ensuring that the approaches are nutrition sensitive. Please do look up the WorldFish website to look at the different approaches that we are applying in different parts of the world. But let me give you 4 examples that I won't go into details with. And the first one is to diversify the consumption of aquatic foods, not just the foods themselves, but products that we can produce from the foods, because an important aspect of diversifying consumption is ensuring that there's diversified foods, that the foods and the products are convenient, they are safe, and very importantly, that they are affordable. Next is improving diversity in production systems and the supply chains. So we've worked a lot with production systems, looking just not at the farming of one species of aquatic foods, but a polyculture of aquatic and the supply chains by putting into place approaches that ensure that the actors in the supply chains, for example, women who are engaged in drying or trading of fish, that they benefit from the approaches we put in place. Importantly, to make a move on having a transformation of food systems with aquatic foods, national and state policies are important. And this we have seen, for example, in the state of Odisha in India, that the state government has integrated the policies of production, the policies of fisheries and aquaculture, together with the policies of nutrition and health to ensure that the aquatic foods that are produced are used for improving nutrition and health of the poor and vulnerable, for example, in school feeding programs and mother and child healthcare programs. And importantly, as we move forward with the transformation of food systems, we need to have a greater engagement of women. And it says of itself that youth should be included, as we are looking not only forward to 2030, but to 2050 and intergenerationally. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, let me leave you with 3 recommendations. 1, importantly, we must recognize the crucial role of aquatic foods in food, land, and water systems transformation for sustainable, nutritious, and equitable food systems. I've talked a lot about the benefits, but it's very important that whatever benefits we work and seek to reach, that there must be aspect, we must work on the principles of the right of food to all. We must work on the principle of leaving no one behind and ensure that there's social equity and social justice. 2, we need to amplify the investments in research, innovations, and scaling of aquatic food solutions at all levels, not just the global level as we have with these international conferences, but all the way to the household and community level. And in doing so, we must make sure that there are pathways and processes whereby the traditional knowledge moves from communities and households up to the policymakers and influence the investments and influence the solutions that are put in place. And importantly for me, we must value aquatic foods for nourishing nations beyond just the monetary value. Now we look at aquatic foods and very few aquatic foods in terms of quantity, weight, and then trade, and then the monetary value of that trade in terms of how it influences the GDP of a nation. That's not where we should be today. We do know that aquatic foods are superfoods in terms of health and nutrition. And if we were to value, for example, aquatic foods in terms of well-nourished children, well-nourished women, well-nourished populations, the effect it would have on school performance and work performance, we are having a greater contribution towards national development and intergenerational development of all peoples. Thank you so much. So holistic food, land and water system transformation is only possible with the inclusion of aquatic foods. Next slide, please. Thank you all, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Please look at the WorldFish website, and you can pose questions to me as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shakuntala, for this interesting and very inspiring talk, talking about superfoods for the people and for the planet, if managed in the right way. Thank you very much. Can we please change slides? So we are going to move on to our next speaker. Any questions that are raised will be brought up later during the discussion session for your information. So our next speaker, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Gladys Okemwa. She's a senior research scientist at the Kenyan Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, KEMFRI, and she's going to talk about sustainable artisanal fisheries from a Kenyan perspective. Welcome, Gladys. You are muted at the moment, so unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be taking you through some of our experiences that we've had here in Kenya in terms of ensuring that the fisheries are exploited in a sustainable manner. Next slide. Issues of concern regarding sustainable fisheries, we are all aware of them. The biggest challenge that we're having is overfishing. Use of destructive fishing methods such as bit seines. We're also losing essential fish habitats, especially breeding and nursery grounds for fisheries. And then we have a challenge of illegal fishing where our local fishers may interact and use maybe illegal gears or access restricted areas. And then we have issues of pollution and climate change. So all these interact and challenge sustainable fisheries, especially in developing countries such as Kenya. Next slide. The main focus, as we know, even under the Sustainable Development Goals, is trying to get rid of destructive fishing gears. And in Kenya, we have different types of gears which have been banned, and like spear guns and beach seines. We know the harmful effects that these gears have on the habitat. Some of these gears have been introduced, and some of them are traditional. So this gives a very major challenge in terms of managing these gears because they're being persistently used, and in some areas they're even increasing in use. Next slide. And the driving forces, open access nature, where anyone who wants to access a fishery or become a fisherman is able to access. So it's open. We have very weak governance systems, and even our capacity and resources are quite low. Then we have the challenge of increasing population levels, and as population levels increase, the demand for fish and fishery products also increases. Then the other challenge is high poverty levels, because then fish is seen as the only source of income, and also the cheapest source of protein for many coastal communities. Then, of course, as fisheries go down, there's the use of more less selective fishing gears. So this drives use of destructive fishing methods. Next slide. So promoting sustainable fisheries, from our experience here in Kenya, is that it requires the application of multifaceted approaches, which I will mention in the next slides, but mainly they must be community-centered. And I'll just give a highlight of the few that we have experienced. Next slide. We've had a few community-based conservation initiatives. And the first one I'd like to mention is the establishment of temporary octopus closures. So these closures are becoming embraced or more popular now, especially in the East African region. And we've also developed co-management areas. So these are areas that are managed jointly by local communities, fisher communities. And then we have that interaction with the management institutions as well. So in terms of the temporary closures, we've had a very good experience in the North Coast, in the Lamu area, where around 200 hectares of area was closed to octopus fishing. So they closed this area for about 3 to 4 months, and then they opened the area for about 1 week. And you can see the bumper harvest in my photo there, where there's been a lot of good harvesting of octopus since the closures came in. And also we're seeing some benefits from other fisheries, because when these closures are closed, the habitat gets protected and there's a bit of recovery. So apart from the octopus, we're also seeing other fish species being protected from these closures. We're also gear exchange programs, so that is trying to encourage the fishers to stop using the harmful gears in exchange for more environment-friendly gears. We're doing very active habitat restoration, and this is again being done in collaboration with the communities. And the last thing that we're also ensuring is that we are mainstreaming gender in the community initiatives. That means involving the youth and involving the women as well. Next slide. We're also doing a lot of training and capacity building, and we're trying to link the research that we're doing, the science, with management, and making the communities appreciate the importance of science in managing their resources. This education is empowering them, because now they're able to understand the impact of their activities on the resources and the need to conserve them and come up with measures that will assist in conserving. Next slide. We're encouraging participatory research and monitoring. So I'd like to highlight that even the surveys that we do them jointly with the communities. We've tried to do participatory mapping, where they map their activities in the sea, and this will help us in marine spatial planning. And this, in the end, has also helped to build consensus, because they're able now to make decisions from an informed place. And this has built consensus in terms of creating collective action and agreement on proposed management measures. Next slide. So community engagement, again, is centered even in our planning and implementation. So we introduced a reef restoration initiative. We have an initiative in the South Coast and in the North Coast, and we have involved them in the planning. So we don't just come out of nowhere and say we're coming up with this intervention, but we plan with them, we identify the sites, they select the sites that they want to restore, and this promotes transparency and helped to build trust among the communities. But this requires consistent engagement and interaction between those bringing in the intervention and those who are involved. Next slide. So this is just examples of the hands-on participation that we've been having in habitat restoration. You can see in the first slide, we have the women developing, coming up with the cement discs, which are used as artificial reefs. So we have the youth, we have the senior fishers and the men. And we also have the youth you can see at the bottom. So those are the ones who have all the strength, and you can see they're carrying the heavy boulders into the sea. And we've seen this has been done for about a year. So currently we're actually seeing the habitats are attracting fish into the area, and this has been very encouraging. So the good thing is that the communities are actually seeing how their intervention is creating positive impact. Thank you. Next slide. So we're also trying to enhance self-compliance, because even as much as you come up with measures, the community has to be policed, let us say policed, but policed in terms of complying. Even in the octopus closures, for example, you have to ensure that no one is encroaching into the closures. So we're promoting self-compliance, and the communities have adapted this. There's community rangers that have been empowered, and they are encouraging and assisting in encouraging self-compliance. So this is helping in community-based monitoring, and they're able again to see how they are impacting in terms of positive change in terms of overfishing. Next slide. So in conclusion, what I would like to emphasize are three issues. Number one, the bottom-up approach. That means working with the communities up is best, because this achieves consensus. It equips communities to own their interventions, and this contributes to better management of fishery resources. Community-based interventions are more likely to be long-lasting because they foster compliance. And finally, partnership and stakeholder collaboration is key to success. So I'll move to my last slide, which shows all the different organizations. We have government bodies, we have non-government organizations, we have counties, and this has really, this collaboration has been very successful, and this is my last parting shot, that collaboration is very key in terms of achieving success in conservation initiatives. Thank you so much. I'll welcome questions after this, but thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gladys, for this interesting and enlightening presentation, particularly putting community approaches and focus, and how we should focus on a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach, and how important collaboration and engagement is. So thank you very much for this inspiring talk. Thank you. So we move on. Now we've heard about the aquatic foods and how important it is for nourishing nations. We've heard about artisanal fisheries and some sustainable, or some ways of performing sustainable fisheries. And now we're going to move on to aquaculture. And we have Dr. Francis Manda with us. He's a lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And he will be talking about alternative feeds in aquaculture. So welcome, Francis. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm here to present to you the issue concerned with the alternative feed in aquaculture. As known, the main issues in aquaculture is to solve to ensure there is access to sustainability and the low cost of fees for our farmed fish. So in my PhD project, which was the jointly work between SLU and UDSM, we identified several alternative for local feed ingredients in Tanzania and evaluated them as components in feed to tilapia instead of using these expensive local feed ingredients, I mean fish meal. Thank you. Next slide. So in this slides, you can see there is two figures. This figure indicate the aquaculture and the fisheries production trend, and as you see for the first figure indicated that the fisheries production in the country is stagnated over several decades, which follow the the trend of the world fisheries productions. But the most about 80% of the fisheries production were dominated by the small scale fisheries. And for the second figure it shows the trend of aquaculture productions. This aquaculture production gained its popularity in the recent years, mostly from 2016 onwards. And this production trend followed the world aquaculture production, but its contribution in the annual fisheries production is minimal, which is accounted only about for 7% of the annual fish production. Next. Yes, based on this trend of the increasing aquaculture operations, the number in the recent years, there is some increased interest in fish farming, in which the number of fish farmers were increased from 17,000 in 2012 up to 31,000 by May 2022. And as the farming operation increase, it leads to the demand of the fish feeds. So both the large scale and small scale fish farmers, they were looking for the alternative as these demands increasing, and mostly based on either commercial fish feeds or that some others were focused on the non-commercial fish feeds. And based on our studies, which is done in Tanzania, and also based on the other studies, which indicated that over 80% of the small-scale fish farmers, they relied on local feed ingredients. And most of these fish farmers were located in the countryside. So there is an issue here. These fish farmers, they don't know their quality of this local feed ingredient, because most of them, they just use either a single or the mixture of 1 or 2 local feed ingredients. So based on our studies in my PhD, we tried to locate some of the potential local feed ingredients as listed on the blue box here. Next. So because of that issue, this figure here showed the status of fish feeds production in Tanzania. As I mentioned earlier, that as the increase in the aquaculture operations lead to the high demand of the fish feeds. So this figure here shows the status of the fish feeds production in the country, which increasing from 2019 up to 2020 up to this moment by May 2020, in where the production is 2,156 metric tons. This production amount is not enough to meet the fish farmers' demand, but because the current fish farmers' demand is over 4,000 metric tons, and therefore here is where we try to looking for the potential of analyzing these local feed ingredients and to ensure we use those resources we have in the country in terms of the industrial byproducts, agricultural byproducts, animal byproducts, and the sum of the machine, the pellet machine we have. Then we try to evaluate the quality of these local feed ingredients in order to ensure there is a sustainability in fish feeds production, and also which lead to the production of the fish feeds and to ensure the food security. Next. Next. Yes, in fish feeds, the protein content is the one of the most important factor. So the research from our project and also from the other studies indicated that the medium to high protein content were reported from the local feed ingredients of the animal origin, while the medium to low protein content were reported in other categories. But the protein value reported in the local feed ingredients of all categories were within the range to meet the protein requirement for the optimal fish growth and health. Next. So in a fish feeds production, there is about three factors we need to consider: the palatability, acceptability, and digestibility, as well as the bioavailability of a particular fish feeds to feed to fish, to the cultured fish species. So here this figure here shows that those local feed ingredients with the high protein content but low fiber content were selected and as a potential local feed ingredients and used to formulate the diet which is tested for the digestibility in the cultured tilapia fish species. So as you see here in the protein sources, there is a fish meal, broiler, spent yeast, kettle blood, freshwater shrimps, marine shrimps, fish frames, duckweed, and moringa leaves. All of these, they were the test ingredients which were integrated with the other inclusion, and that were tested in the cultured fish, and at the end it indicated that all these tested local feed ingredients were digestible, but with the exception of this duckweed, based on this figure here, as you see. So from here, based on the cost benefit and availability to ensure sustainability, we choose only 5 local feed ingredients which we formulated another diet to test their effect on the growth performance of the fish and the carcass traits. So these shrimps, those local feed ingredients listed on the orange box is shrimps, yeast, fish frames, blood, moringa were tested for the growth performance in the next slides.
Francis,
okay,
you have
next.
2 minutes left.
Okay, next slide, please. So this figure here, it shows the growth curve, which indicated that almost all the tested local feed ingredients showed the proportion. They have the good proportion of the growth, and there was no significant difference which is reported in our studies between the fish meal and the tested diets, which show that this the tested local feed ingredients, it can replace the fish meal in our diet. Next slide. So I would like to conclude that the diets fed to tilapia, where the fish meal was replaced with alternative local feed ingredients by 50%, gives the results in which it was really efficiently utilized and give us the high growth rate. And also those dyes which replaced by 50%, also it reduced the cost of producing one kg of biomass of fish by 30%. And lastly, I would like to conclude that the profitability of small-scale tilapia production in Tanzania can be improved by introducing of good quality, low-cost, locally available feed ingredients as a replacement of the fish meals. And this, by doing so, will reduce the cost of producing fish feeds, will improve the quality production of the quality fish feeds, which will enable the fast growth rate of the fish, shut down the culture period, and improve the farmer's profit and the fish production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, for this insightful talk. It's good to see that there is promise in including alternative local feeds and that it can even be cost efficient. So good to see that, and thank you for this talk. We can change slides. So we're moving on to our last presenter. It's my colleague, Dr. Örjan Östman. He's a senior lecturer at the Department of Aquatic Resources at SLU. And he will be finishing off the presentations today by giving some Swedish examples, both from the small-scale fisheries and also from aquaculture. So he'll be talking about farming of wild-caught perch and diversification of targeted species. Welcome, Örjan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I will give some examples from Swedish waters on small-scale fisheries and integration between fisheries, small-scale fisheries, and aquaculture. So next slide, please. So here are two kind of conceptual figures. To the left of a more modern, or the standard fish production system the last decades in Sweden, or for small-scale fisheries. So fishers, they get a catch and they can sell the high valuable catch of it, usually in Sweden, in Baltic Sea, that has been cod, for example, or salmon or eel and so on. Many of these species are today in poor condition or are even forbidden to catch. But the other part of the catch has been like bad catch due to that fish are too small, or there are species that are not sellable. These are basically just been thrown back to the sea, or thrown back somewhere else. At the same time, there is fish farming also increasing in the Nordic countries, especially around Norwegian, in Norway, of course. That is dependent on external imports of fish feeds, as Francis also talked about here. So the question is, can we improve the value chain and maybe also the resource use in small-scale fisheries? So our idea has been that you should, after catch, you should try to get more of it to sell it for human consumption as high valuable, and that the low valuable catches could be used, for example, in farming. And the thing that cannot be used in farming, residues like heads and gutter, for example, can also be used as fish feeds through, for example, insect larvae production. So this is the background, and we have tried to look at two examples here of how we can improve the resource use and value chains in small-scale fisheries. So next slide, please. I will start with with the potential overview of using to farming wild-caught fish. So in Sweden, we have problems that some species are too small to be sellable or in poor condition. That applies, for example, to cod in the Baltic Sea. Now there's a fishing ban on it, but that was before. And also perch is a species that there are a lot of small perch that are not really big enough for selling. So we reviewed like what are the pros and cons of farming wild fish, aquaculture or wild fish. And there are some clear pros like high resource use of catches, and there is you don't throw back the fish into the sea afterwards, and the fisher can get a more even income if it sells the farm fish over the year, and also improve the working conditions. There are clearly some problems with the farming wild fish, and might be a high mortality before the fish adapt to the feeds. There can be local eutrophication from the feeds. There's definitely an increased cost of production as you need to buy the infrastructure and also spend time on it. There might be stress and diseases among the fish, and there are clearly ethical and legal aspects that must be considered. Next, please. So we started with a pilot study on farming of wild perch. First, we did a very small scale pilot study in fish tanks, where we tried with insect larvae, and that is black soldier fly larvae that had been reared on compost of vegetable and bread. We also tried mealworm larvae or mealworms, tenebrio. And in this fish tank experiment, we saw that the perch ate this insect larvae. So now we wanted to do like a field scale experiment. So we have this larger net cages of 30 cubic meter, and we put around 200 undersized perch in each cage. So they are around 20 to 25 centimeters, and they should be around 30 centimeters to be sellable. And then we started this last autumn, and we gave them 3 start treatment, insect larvae only, and then we had bycatch only, which was local catches of cyprinids, mainly roach. And then we have a mixed treatment, like of insects and bycatch. Next, please. There was some kind of initial mortality, and especially the insect treatment had a bit higher or lower survival, I should say, than the other 2 treatments. Although maybe it's good with the insects, in this case, in this setup, we had a lower survival on the insects treatments only, whereas as they were fed bycatch of cyprinids had higher survival, around 75% during the first winter. We just recently, a week ago, initiated the second phase of this experiment, where we study more on somatic growth now when temperature are warmer. And then we have changed the feeds a bit, so we only test with the cyprinids. And then we have added a new treatment with round goby, that is a more fatter fish, but it's also an invasive species in the area. And then we try a mix of cyprinid round goby. But we thought the insect treatment was not that interesting to continue with. Next, please.
You have 2 minutes, Örjan.
Yes, thanks. Another project that we've been working with is to use cyprinid fisheries, or to use more of the catches of cyprinid fishes as human food. And this could potentially be an economic and environmental win-win situation, because these species lives in eutrophic environment, and by increasing catches on them, you can retake or recycle nutrients from the ocean. It will also diversify small-scale fisheries and at the same time reduce fishing pressure on more overexploited species. And in this project, we focused on bream and eyed. Next, please. We did a review of several aspects of this, and when it comes to toxicity or the contaminants, we consider that they are generally safe to consume. Some individuals have had elevated levels of especially PFAS. But at the same time, there is also a lot of cyprinid fish in Swedish waters, and we think that around 2,000 tons per year could be possibly harvested sustainably each year. However, the positive effects on the marine environment is highly uncertain, we must say. And the main challenge to increase this type of fisheries is that the products must be demanded or sellable, which is not really the case today. So there is a need for product development. Okay, and finally, final slide, I hope. Actually, I haven't done so much of this work myself. So the perch studies has been done by Rebecca Svensson, Glenn Free, that is a small-scale fisherman, and Peter Ljungberg has helped a lot. And this was done with Professor Anders Kissling at the SLU. And also thanks Iris Dahlin, Sandra Levin, Andreas von Bellekom, and Jens Olsson for the studies on fish, on cyprinid fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Örjan, for your talk, for your interesting talk on how to integrate both small-scale fisheries and farming by using low valuable catches and invasive species also in farming. So thank you very much. Very, very inspiring. We are going to have a short break before we move on to the discussion panel. So we have approximately 7 or 8 minutes break before we introduce our 4 panelists, and they get to reflect on these presentations and answer questions and have a discussion together with our speakers. So I'll see you back at 10:30 Central European Time. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to our webinar on securing sustainable access to aquatic foods with focus on sustainable small-scale fisheries and aquaculture. I want to start by thanking our 4 speakers for their very inspiring and informative presentations covering the range of aquatic foods, the importance of aquatic foods, what it is, and also talking about sustainable fisheries and sustainable aquaculture. And we've heard presentations from various geographical locations. So it's a very broad topic, but an interesting one. So we're going to move on to the next part of this webinar, and that is a discussion. We have 4 panelists with us today. We have Dr. Max Trell, who's an associate professor at the Bayer Institute in Sweden. We have Dr. Martin M. Tolera. He's a senior lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam. And we have Dr. Hampus Eriksson, who's a senior scientist at WorldFish. And last but not least, Sebastian Matthew, who's an executive director from the International Collective in Support of Fish Workers, ICSF. Welcome to our panel, and welcome back to our audience and to our speakers. So to start this discussion, I would like to ask the panelists, I'll start with you, Hampus, to give a short reflection on the presentations from your experiences and your background.
Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you to all the speakers for interesting, informative, and quite diverse presentations. It was a little bit of not a challenge, but yeah, I enjoyed taking notes and trying to string a red thread through the presentations. And I'll do my best to try to reflect a little bit from, I guess, a research for development, a research in development kind of perspective. And how do we make our research count? I guess that's the question I'm trying to get at here. And I think aquatic foods and livelihoods are inextricably linked. Shakuntala's presentation clearly spoke to that. And it is amazing how the emphasis has evolved, primarily framed as a conservation and sustainability challenge, to a sustainable nutrition food opportunity. And Örjan's presentation really speaks to this. I think that's so cool, and it makes so much sense to focus on these lesser known or lesser prioritized species, which we know have been eaten for a very long time in many countries and during periods of hardship or in rural places. So that's one of my first reflections. I think that all sort of strings together really nicely. But how do we make our research count? And it's something that's come up a lot over the past couple of years, I'd say, as more research is being produced, but not all research has a meaning for reaching the development outcomes that I think Shakuntala framed really well. So there was a study that came out last year that found that 2% of published research in agronomic and agricultural fields published original high quality data about solution for small scale producers. 2%. Of course, not all research has to be applied, but looking at that 2% feels measly in comparison to the grand challenges that have been defined for humanity. So in that regard, I think the focus for the desired change, while difficult to fold in theory, tend to be quite generic. We focus on building value chains, improve handling and processing, increase access to markets. And those ideas are clearly relevant, but they're not new. And they're often tangled up in conceptualized views of economy and top-down planning. So the frontier I think we have in front of us is using all this research and say, how can this research be used to transform food system in ways that fit with people's lives? Again, circling back to Shakuntala's note about aquatic foods and livelihoods being inextricably linked. So I think moving more deliberately towards thinking about partnerships and equity in partnerships. And yeah, so not only equity in the outcomes that we seek, but equity in the partnerships that we hold, so that we as researchers, as a research community, in relation to the title of this presentation, try to define research in ways that are new and that integrates research in change processes already underway. And I think Gladys' presentation really speaks to that, with some good, clear advice for co-creation of learning and the connection of research into change processes underway within communities. And I think that's my reflection. I didn't prepare something for this because I really wanted to see what I felt when I watched these, but that's my clear reflection. And I think I'd like to say that I don't think there's ever been a more promising or exciting time for positive change. There's a whole new generation of skilled and capable leaders across countries and communities and food system researchers. And they all have really important roles to play in this change. And we as a research community have to somehow stand behind them and support them with good research. And I think this seminar has collected some of that research. That's my reflection, Charlotte. I hope that helps bring it forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Hampus, for that sort of positive note and looking at this new generation and ways forward. Thank you very much. I would really like to hear Sebastian's reflection coming from the non-sort of research side of things. And what's your reflection on the talks today?
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. First of all, thank you for inviting ICSF to be part of this panel. I think all the four presentations are very interesting within the framework of sustainable livelihoods, circular economy, sustainable livelihoods, and so I think it's fairly clear that we are in the age of sustainable development goals, and the Ocean Conference is coming in. So I think this is very well sort of framed in that context. Having said that, I would like to discuss with Shakuntala, for example, when we talk about aquatic food systems, because food systems I understand, because that is coming out of the 2014 International Conference on Nutrition. But when you move by 2021 with that paper in Nature into aquatic food systems, is it really time to talk about a system? Because I know that, living in India, we have, when you look at the inland sector, there are conflicts between irrigation, power generation, flood management, fishing, and fish farming. So all these people are fighting for water to begin with. So therefore, water, those who look at water as a precious commodity do not want to share it with the fishers or with the fish farmers. So therefore, our fishermen are asking for minimum flow in the rivers, or asking for interstate agreement for water to come from one country to another, or between states, or to have a minimum level of water where they can do some farming. So these are the kind of issues facing. So therefore, human right to water and human right to fish as food, I think there is a conflict. Farmers always think that they have a greater right over water than fishers have. So we do have some kind of a residual right to water. So that's important. And then when you come to marine fisheries, we have the kind of small scale, large scale. I mean, when you talk about sustainable, nutritious, equitable food systems, I think what comes to my mind are the small scale artisanal fisheries contribution. They fit very well into that kind of a framework. But there is, every day there are fights between different active gear, passive gear, large gear, small gear. And there is still the governance have to evolve to deal with these kind of conflicts. And then when you come to freshwater aquaculture, then coastal aquaculture, mariculture, I mean, you can see that there are so many tourism, power generation, windmills, there are all kinds of conflicts within the marine spatial planning framework. So therefore, unless I think the research community has some kind of a coherent approach to looking at all these different sources of food, I mean, we cannot really talk about food systems, aquatic food systems. So therefore, you think the research community is mature enough to internalize this concept and to move in a horizontal manner, so that there is a much greater attempt to see the interconnectedness of aquatic food. And then the research agenda itself is sort of tuned accordingly. And then as a result, the outcome would be small-scale fishers, women in fishing communities, people not getting displaced, not getting marginalized, so that that sort of a space for their livelihood activity can be protected, maintained for the present and future generations. So that's important. I would like to clarify with you. And then to Gladys, I think an important presentation. I mean, your first part of your presentation, you were talking about the kind of destructive gear used by small-scale artisanal fishers. Dynamiting, I saw one picture of dynamite being used. But then these are the kind of situation which I associate with poverty. When fishermen are very poor, the communities are very poor, you see them resorting to destructive gear, dynamite fishing. So therefore, do you see, in addition to community-based management, do you also see a role for the state social protection measures, which is also one of the key messages coming out of the International Conference on Nutrition in 2014, that social protection is very important. And this is also a message which comes through the SDGs. It's also being one of the targets linked to social protection. So therefore, I think we cannot expect the small-scale sector through community-based management to deal with all the problems of poverty and malnutrition. And we also need the larger community and the state to stand by the poor in each country. And therefore, we cannot, therefore, stress less the importance of social protection measures. So therefore, effective non-contributory type of social protection, pension schemes, looking after the widows, children, men, working women, employment insurance type of, occupational diseases, injuries. So all that have to be dealt with. Therefore, we need to have some kind of a compact between the state and very vulnerable communities. So community is willing to step forward and manage resources, but then the state is willing to come in with social protection measures if there are kind of failures due to a number of reasons, maybe climate change factors, or your resources are diminishing or depleting, or because of power relations in the villages. And again, in this kind of context, we need, again, kind of a broader research agenda, so that we are not only looking at co-management, but what kind of institutional kind of pairing up is required to make sure that the communities and initiatives have a sustainable kind of a space in coastal areas or in inland areas. So I think these are the kind of reflection, and the other two, since they're mainly on aquaculture, I mean, I don't have much to, but I think in the larger frame of things, I see that we have to see how to create and how to protect, how to defend the spaces of the vulnerable communities, and then what role can governance play in that, and then how can the research community contribute through research to improving the governance systems and bring in elements of governance which are often overlooked or which are catering to the interests of the most powerful in the food production economy. So therefore, can we see that all these agendas are also made more kind of sensitive to the issues of poverty in fishing villages, fishing communities, and therefore we can see that there is a collective effort, initiative to lift them out or to work together for a greater prosperity in future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian, for that long, informative, and quite complex reflection. It shows that it's not. There's no easy solutions. It's rather complex, dynamic, and it involves people and conflicts in various ways. So thank you for that reflection from a fisheries side of view. So I'll move on and ask Max, what's your reflection on the presentations and maybe on the reflections also? If there's been quite a lot said by the two other panelists.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to your team at SLU for organizing this. Very interesting. And also thanks to the presenters for so efficiently setting the stage. It's quite a broad stage, taking us from a community fishery in Kenya and reef restoration up to a Swedish lake looking at perch fisheries and experimental aquaculture. So, but we need good challenges. So this is one. I think they managed to give a really nice overview and insights to the diversity of aquatic foods and also to the many different perspectives related to the critical importance of aquatic food for human well-being, and also indicating some sustainability challenges. And I will try and focus my comments on the farming aspects. And it is interesting to note that we are now talking about freshwater fish and not, as usual, salmon, and because we need to remember that 70% of the edible farming production is from freshwater fish. So I think it's timely. Starting with Shakuntala, she said that holistic food, land, water system transformation is only possible with the inclusion of aquatic foods. And I agree totally with that, and that aquatic food from capture fisheries and farming play and may play an even important role in the future. But we need to be aware of that capture fisheries has only limited possibilities for increasing. I mean, there are limits to that. And the main focus is here on nursing and sustaining these valuable resources that we have today, not reduce it. And failing to do that will be very costly for the environment, but also for people being dependent on this resource. And also further, if we look at aquaculture, it may also increase pressure on land resources and land ecosystems. So it's not a zero-sum game. It has different kind of interactions with consequences that we need to consider when we try and come up with a sustainable food system. And for farming, it depends a lot what we decide to farm, what species we farm and what systems we choose. And a holistic approach needs to identify and consider not only how aquatic and land systems are interconnected, but also how capture fisheries are being linked to different aquaculture activities. So that means that even if we now have 4 separate presentations, they are being linked in many ways, how they depend on different kind of resource systems. So that is interesting also to consider. And going back to the presentations, I think the presentations by Francis and Örjan indicated that this dependence comes to a large degree from feeds. Both farming tilapia in Africa and farming perches in Sweden is much related to feed, gaining access to feed resources of sufficient qualities. And this is the same challenge for the global expansion of aquaculture, to find raw material that do not compete with direct human consumption. And in the future that is characterized by scarcity in many different ways. I think this will be challenging, and feed also stands for the majority of environmental impacts if you look at farming, so in aquaculture. And also important to consider when you try and replace fish resources in feeds, as we heard examples of, we are moving environmental impacts to another sector. We will be more dependent on freshwater in agriculture, and that can have consequences from land transformation on biodiversity, etc. And also, in addition, we change nutrient profile for the feed to the fish or whatever we farm. And that is also important to look at nutrient quality of the product. If we replace fish, that is, as we heard, it's a super food also for the animals we farm, then that might have implications for the nutrient content of what we farm. So that also needs to be considered. I think it's really great with the work being done, looking for these waste streams and how they can be directed into aquaculture production. One need to consider the potential for direct use of these resources. Maybe it's more from a nutritional point of view, more efficient to consume them directly than transforming them into a farm product. And also the volume needed for expanding aquaculture need to be considered. There's a challenge for logistics and costs for collecting these in different ways. So it will all be context dependent. And maybe in those cases, small scale is better than large scale because they can actually make use of local resources in a more sustainable way. Yeah, I could continue. I think overall, I think it was a great diversity of presentations. And again, the link between the reef rehabilitation in Kenya also have linkages to what kind of farming activities do we do in these regions that might have an impact. But they are not separated. They are all embedded in a coastal system that needs to be taken into account. So I think I stopped there. So thank you again for the very nice presentations.
Thank you, Max, for your reflections. Also broad and showing the complexity of this, but also showing that the interlinkage between aquaculture and small-scale fisheries, and even though it seems like a broad topic, it's very much interlinked by the various in various ways that you describe. So time is flying and we're getting all these interesting reflections. I'm going to let Martin Mtelera in also to give you your reflection on the presentations. So I'll give you a chance. I'm sure you're going to have a reflection from the aquaculture point of view. So welcome.
Thank you, the four presenters and the first three panelists for the analysis, and I will try to contribute through a question that was posed by Sebastian, the role of governments in trying to improve the situation of small-scale fishers. And we have an experience from a collaboration with the SLU, WorldFish, and the government. And in this, I mean, the collaboration between us and the SLU basically was also aimed at trying to move the government's feet in terms of addressing aquaculture issues. And therefore, in 2016, we tried to meet the government. So we had the SLU, WorldFish, the Tanzania, fisheries, aquaculture experts, and the private sector, together with the government, to meet and ponder on aquaculture development bottlenecks and the way forward. And 7 years later, in April, we had an assessment workshop. I mean, to see the achievements since 2016. And I mean, it is, I mean, we are glad to have noted, one, we have arrested the declining capture fisheries, mainly because of poor management. And in the presentation by Francis, he just showed data from 2016 to the present on capture fisheries. Of course, it's stagnating, but there is a little improvement. If you compare with data from 1990s, from 1990 to 1950, you can clearly see a constant decline. But from that point, there is a little bit of increase. But for the last 7 years, there is an increase, very small, but 15%. But then there has also been an increase in aquaculture output from that. I mean, and the trend there, you could see that the aquaculture from 2014 to 2022 has improved by 600%. And that one is just, emphasizing the role of international collaboration in research and assisting the small-scale fishers, the small-scale aqua farmers, but also the role of consultative sessions between the academia, the private sector, and the governance. So it is also possible to engage researchers, to engage the governance in an effort to address some of the poverty issues. And with that, let me end there.
Thank you very much, Martin, for your reflection and for pointing on the importance of collaboration that's been brought up in all reflections, and also interdisciplinary work and working with a mix of researchers and stakeholders and policymakers and NGOs and all actors involved, and not the least the fishers and the aquaculture farmers themselves. So thank you very much for that. So we are running out of time, but I think we should try and bring in 1 or maybe 2 questions from the audience. So Anna, if you have any urgent questions from the Q&A that you think would enlighten this discussion, please ask them.
Yes, well, we have some questions and I tried to select 1 or 2. Maybe just to start with a question to Francis that links to also Max's reflection about nutrient profiles of the fish, depending on which feed we give them. So a question to Francis is, have you analyzed the nutrient profiles of cultured fish compared with wild fish? If the feed is of low quality, one would expect that fish will be of low nutritional quality also. That the case? So Francis, I don't know if you can try to answer that one.
Hello.
Hello, we can
Thank you,
hear you.
Anna, for thank you, Anna, for your questions. But I didn't try that. I think I need to do that in the near future.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good question. I mean, it's important, of course, what we give them to people. Yeah. Another question from Gladys. What is the Kenyan government doing to curb the issue of weak governance and management capacity, since we have many youths who have been trained at universities on coastal and marine resource management? Is the government involving such youth to utilize the skills that they have acquired to managing such resources?
Good question. I would probably answer it based on my experience where I'm employed, which is at the Kenya Marine and Fishery Research Institute. And us as an institute, what we are doing, we have a very strong internship program. Lots of interns who come in and work with us. So I think that contributes to giving them that experience that they require in terms of getting engaged or getting employed within the resource management institutions. I believe that's the same situation in other government agencies. That's being emphasized by the Kenya government. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if you have time for one more question, maybe not.
I think we actually have to wrap up. It's 11 o'clock. We could probably discuss for another 2 hours or more. But I did see that someone asked to please answer our question in the chat. What we will do is that the questions that are posed in the Q&A that were not answered during this webinar, we will send you an answer through email. So the panelist or the speaker, which the question is directed to, will answer to you. Unfortunately, we have to finish the session. So I want to wrap up by thanking everyone for joining us today, particularly the speakers and the panelists for taking the time and presenting your work and your views on this very broad and complex topic. I also want to say that this webinar has been it's been recorded, and the recording will be available on a YouTube channel for 2 weeks, and then it will be available on request. So if you want to re-see this webinar, or you want to tell your colleagues or friends or people in your network, then you can tell them that this webinar is available for a couple of weeks on the YouTube channel. We also want to highlight that we are working on a synthesis and a policy brief and a short film on the topic. So keep your eyes and ears open for these things in the future. And the synthesis is in the final stages, so we will send that out to all participants today, and you can share that with others. So we realize that it's an urgent topic. Aquatic foods are important for people and for nutrition and for youth and for women and for everyone. There are large challenges, but there are also some solutions, and hopefully we'll have sustainable small-scale fisheries and aquaculture in the future. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a really great weekend. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.